I never expected that a Saturday morning farm auction would change my life forever. The old Henderson place had been sitting empty for 2 years since Martha Henderson passed away, and her distant relatives finally decided to sell everything. The farmhouse was a classic 2-story white building with green shutters, surrounded by weathered barns and outbuildings that spoke of decades of hard work and simple living. The auction was typical of rural sales: folding tables loaded with kitchen items, tools scattered across tarps on the ground, and furniture arranged haphazardly in the yard. Neighbors and antique dealers mingled together, examining items with the practiced eye of people who knew value when they saw it. I had come looking for nothing in particular, just enjoying the atmosphere and hoping to find a small treasure or two. The auctioneer was a local man named Bill Crawford, who had been calling auctions in our county for 30 years. His voice carried across the crowd with that distinctive rhythm that made even mundane items sound exciting. We moved from table to table, bidding on everything from depression glass to farm implements, each item carrying a story of the family that had owned it. As the morning progressed, I found myself drawn to the barn, where the larger items were stored. Old farming equipment, furniture, and various odds and ends filled the space. The smell of hay and old leather hung in the air, creating an atmosphere that was both nostalgic and melancholy. This was where people's lives were reduced to lot numbers and starting bids. That's where I first saw the saddle. It was hanging on a wooden peg in the corner, looking forgotten and neglected. The leather was dark with age and wear, cracked in places and covered with a layer of dust that suggested it hadn't been touched in years. Most people walked right past it without a second glance. Chapter 2. First Impressions. The saddle was clearly old, probably dating back to the 1940s or 1950s, based on its style and construction. It was a Western saddle with a high cantle and deep seat, the kind that working cowboys used for long days in the saddle. The leather was a rich brown that had darkened with age, and despite its worn appearance, I could see quality craftsmanship in the stitching and hardware. What caught my attention wasn't its condition, which was admittedly poor, but the subtle details that spoke of superior construction. The stirrup leathers were thick and well made, the tree felt solid beneath the worn covering, and the silver conchos, though tarnished, were clearly hand-engraved. This had been an expensive saddle when it was new, built to last a lifetime of hard use. I ran my hands over the leather, feeling the texture and examining the construction more closely. The seat was worn smooth by countless hours of use, and the horn showed the rope burns that came from working cattle. This wasn't a show saddle or a weekend rider's equipment. This was a working cowboy's most important tool, shaped by years of honest labor. The stirrups hung at the perfect length for someone about my height, and when I lifted the saddle to test its weight, it felt balanced and comfortable in my hands. Despite its appearance, the saddle had good bones. With some leather conditioner and careful restoration, it could be brought back to functional condition, maybe even beauty. Other auction goers occasionally glanced at the saddle, but most dismissed it quickly. I heard one dealer mutter to his companion about worthless old junk and not worth the effort to haul away. Their dismissal only made me more interested. Sometimes the best finds were the items that others overlooked. Chapter 3. The bidding begins. When the auctioneer finally reached the saddle, I positioned myself where I could see both him and the other potential bidders. The crowd had thinned somewhat as people lost interest in the barn items, focusing instead on the household goods and smaller antiques that were easier to transport and resell. "Next up, we have this old saddle," Bill Crawford announced, his voice carrying less enthusiasm than it had for the previous items. "Lot 247, Western saddle, needs some work but still has some life left in it. Who'll start the bidding at $50? The silence that followed was telling. Nobody wanted to open the bidding at that price for something they considered worthless. "How about 25? The auctioneer tried again. Still no response from the crowd. I could see him getting ready to lower the opening bid even further, which was my cue to act. I raised my hand and called out, "I'll take it at 25. A few people turned to look at me with expressions that ranged from curiosity to amusement. "Thank you, sir. I have 25, now looking for 30, Crawford continued, scanning the crowd for another bidder. The silence stretched on, broken only by a few chuckles from nearby auction goers, who clearly thought I was making a mistake. One man shook his head and said loud enough for others to hear, "Some people will bid on anything." "Going once at $25, the auctioneer called. "Going twice." He paused, giving anyone else a chance to bid. "Sold for $25 to the gentleman in the blue shirt." He pointed at me with his gavel, and I felt a mixture of satisfaction and uncertainty. Had I just bought a worthless piece of junk, or had I found something special? Chapter 4. The Laughter and Comments. As I made my way to the clerk's table to pay for my purchase, the comments from other auction goers followed me like a chorus of doubt. $25 for that old thing," one woman said to her husband. "He could have bought a decent saddle pad for that money." Her husband nodded in agreement, adding, "Some people don't know quality when they see it." A dealer I recognized from other auctions shook his head as I passed. "That saddle's not worth the leather it's made from," he said to his companion. "Look at those cracks and the stitchings coming apart. He'll spend more on restoration than it'll ever be worth." Ooh, his assessment stung a little, because I respected his knowledge of antiques and collectibles. Even the auctioneer's assistant, a young man who helped move items and collect payments, seemed amused by my purchase. "You planning to ride that thing?" he asked with a grin as I handed over my $25. "Might want to check it for holes before you trust it with your weight." His comment drew more laughter from nearby bidders. The clerk, an elderly woman who had been taking payments all morning, was more diplomatic, but equally skeptical. "That's a lot of work you're taking on," she said as she wrote out my receipt. "My late husband used to restore old tack, and he always said some things are too far gone to save, but maybe you see something the rest of us don't." I tried to maintain confidence in my decision, but the constant stream of negative comments was beginning to make me second-guess myself. Had I really seen quality craftsmanship, or had I just convinced myself that the saddle was worth saving? As I walked back to collect my purchase, I wondered if I had just made a very expensive mistake. Chapter 5. Taking it home. Loading the saddle into my truck required some careful maneuvering. It was heavier than I had expected, which I took as a good sign. Quality leather and a solid tree added weight, while cheap construction typically felt light and flimsy. The saddle filled the truck bed with the rich smell of old leather and the mustiness that comes with age and storage. The drive home gave me time to think about what I had done. $25 wasn't a fortune, but it wasn't pocket change either, especially for something that might turn out to be worthless. I found myself alternating between excitement about the potential restoration project and worry that I had been fooled by my own optimism. My workshop was a converted garage behind my house, equipped with basic tools and a workbench that had seen countless projects over the years. I'd restored furniture, repaired farm equipment, and even rebuilt a few antique tools. So working with leather wasn't completely foreign to me, but a saddle was more complex than anything I had tackled before. I hung the saddle on a wooden sawhorse and began examining it more closely under the bright fluorescent lights of the workshop. The damage was more extensive than I had realized at the auction. Several seams were splitting, the leather was dry and cracked in multiple places, and some of the hardware was loose or missing entirely. But as I studied the construction, my initial instincts seemed confirmed. The stitching, where it was intact, was precise and strong. The leather, despite its condition, was thick and high quality. The tree felt solid, and the overall design showed the kind of attention to detail that marked superior craftsmanship. This had been an expensive saddle when it was new. Chapter 6. Beginning the restoration. I started the restoration process by carefully cleaning the saddle with a soft brush and leather cleaner, working section by section to remove decades of accumulated dirt and grime. As I worked, the true color of the leather began to emerge, a rich, warm brown that had been hidden beneath the surface dirt and oxidation. The cleaning revealed more details about the saddle's construction and history. Maker's marks that had been obscured became visible, showing that it had been crafted by a respected saddlery in Texas. The serial number, stamped into the leather beneath the seat, indicated it had been made in 1947. This was definitely a quality piece from the golden age of Western saddlery. As I worked, I began to notice something unusual about the saddle's construction. The seat seemed thicker than necessary, and there was a slight irregularity in the leather that didn't match the rest of the craftsmanship. Running my hands over the area, I could feel what seemed like a seam or closure hidden beneath the surface. The discovery made me pause in my cleaning. Was this just a repair that had been made over the years, or was there something more to it? The irregularity was subtle, but definitely present, running along the back edge of the seat in a way that didn't match the original construction lines. It was almost as if something had been added or modified after the saddle was completed. I decided to continue with the basic cleaning before investigating further. Whatever was causing the irregularity had been there for decades, so a few more hours wouldn't matter, but the mystery added an extra layer of interest to the restoration project, and I found myself working with increased attention to detail. Chapter 7. The Discovery. After several hours of careful cleaning and conditioning, I returned to the mysterious irregularity in the seat. Under better lighting, and with the surface dirt removed, I could see what appeared to be a carefully concealed zipper running along the back edge of the seat. The zipper was old and had been dyed to match the leather, making it nearly invisible unless you knew what to look for. My heart began to race as I realized what I had found. Someone had deliberately created a hidden compartment in this saddle, and they had done it with such skill that it had gone unnoticed for decades. The craftsmanship of the concealment was as impressive as the original saddle construction, suggesting that whoever had done the work was a master leather worker. I carefully worked the zipper, which was stiff from age but still functional. As it opened, I could see that there was indeed a compartment carved out of the saddle tree itself. The space was lined with oiled leather to protect whatever had been stored inside, and it was clear that considerable thought had gone into creating this hiding place. Inside the compartment, wrapped in what appeared to be oiled cloth, was a package about the size of a large envelope. My hands trembled slightly as I carefully extracted it from its hiding place. The cloth was old, but had done its job. Whatever was inside appeared to be dry and well preserved. I set the package on my workbench and carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a collection of documents, including what appeared to be legal papers, photographs, and handwritten letters. The top document was clearly a last will and testament, written in the careful script of someone who understood the importance of what they were creating. Chapter 8. Reading the Will. The will was dated 1952 and was written by someone named James Jim Henderson, presumably a relative of Martha Henderson, whose estate sale had brought me the saddle. The document was handwritten but clearly legible, and it had been witnessed and notarized according to the legal requirements of the time. As I read through the will, an incredible story began to unfold. Jim Henderson had been Martha's older brother, a rancher who'd never married and had no children of his own. According to the document, he had hidden his will in the saddle because he didn't trust banks or lawyers, and he wanted to ensure that his wishes would be carried out exactly as he intended. The will revealed that Jim had been far wealthier than anyone in the family had known. In addition to his ranch, which was described as 640 acres of prime grazing land in Brewster County, Texas, he had substantial investments in oil and gas leases, mining claims, and even some early technology stocks that had apparently performed very well over the decades. Most surprisingly, the will indicated that Jim had never told his family about the full extent of his wealth. He had lived simply, reinvesting his profits and building a substantial estate while maintaining the appearance of a modest rancher. The total value of his holdings, even in 1952 dollars, was impressive, easily worth millions in today's money. The will named Martha as his primary beneficiary, but it included a crucial provision. If Martha died without children or without updating the will to reflect her own wishes, the entire estate would go to whoever finds this document and can prove they acquired it legally. Jim had essentially created a treasure hunt, trusting that fate would deliver his wealth to someone who deserved it. Chapter 9. The supporting documents. Along with the will, the package contained a wealth of supporting documents that told the complete story of Jim Henderson's life and fortune. There were photographs of him as a young cowboy, letters from business associates, and detailed records of his various investments and property holdings. One particularly interesting document was a letter Jim had written to accompany the will, explaining his reasoning for hiding it in the saddle. He wrote about his distrust of lawyers and banks, his belief that wealth should go to people who would appreciate and use it wisely, and his hope that whoever found the documents would be someone with the sense to see value where others see only junk. The letter also contained specific instructions for claiming the inheritance. Jim had set up a trust with a law firm in Austin, Texas, with instructions that the trust would remain active for 50 years after his death. Anyone who presented the original will and could prove they had acquired the saddle legally would be entitled to claim the inheritance, which had been growing with compound interest for decades. Bank statements and investment records showed that Jim had been remarkably prescient in his financial decisions. He had invested in companies that would later become household names, purchased mineral rights that had proven extremely valuable, and accumulated real estate in areas that had experienced tremendous growth over the subsequent decades. Perhaps most touching were the personal letters and photographs that revealed Jim as a thoughtful, generous man who had quietly helped many people in his community. He had paid for children's medical treatments, helped struggling ranchers keep their land, and supported local schools and churches, all without seeking recognition or credit for his generosity. Chapter 10. Verification and legal steps. The first step in claiming the inheritance was to verify the authenticity of the documents and establish the legal chain of ownership for the saddle. I contacted the law firm mentioned in Jim's letter, which was still in operation after all these years, though now run by the grandson of the original attorney who had helped set up the trust. The lawyer, David Morrison, was initially skeptical when I called to explain what I had found. "We get calls about the Henderson Trust maybe once or twice a year," he told me, "usually from people who think they're related to the family or who have heard rumors about hidden money. But you're the first person who's ever mentioned finding documents in a saddle." I arranged to meet with Morrison and bring the original documents for authentication. The law firm had maintained detailed records of the trust, including photographs and copies of the original will, which would allow them to verify whether what I had found was genuine. They also had specific protocols for testing the age and authenticity of documents. The authentication process took several weeks and involved multiple experts. Handwriting analysts confirmed that the will was written by Jim Henderson, comparing it to other documents in the law firm's files. Paper and ink analysis confirmed that the documents dated to the 1950s. Most importantly, the specific details in the will matched information that had never been made public. Meanwhile, I had to prove that I had acquired the saddle legally. Fortunately, I had kept my receipt from the auction, and the auction house had detailed records of the sale. Martha Henderson's estate had been properly probated, and all items sold at the auction had clear title. The chain of ownership was unbroken and completely legal. Chapter 11. The inheritance revealed. When the authentication was complete and my legal ownership of the saddle was confirmed, David Morrison invited me to his office for a complete briefing on the Henderson Trust. What he revealed was beyond anything I had imagined when I first unzipped that hidden compartment. The trust had been growing for over 70 years, and Jim Henderson's conservative investment strategy had paid off spectacularly. The original ranch had been sold in the 1960s and the proceeds invested in a diversified portfolio. Oil and gas leases had generated substantial royalties. Early investments in technology companies had multiplied many times over. The total value of the trust had reached an amount that Morrison had to repeat twice before I could fully comprehend it. After legal fees and taxes, I would inherit approximately $12.8 million. The man who had hidden his will in a saddle had created one of the most successful long-term investment strategies in Texas history. But the inheritance wasn't just about money. The trust also included Jim Henderson's personal effects, his collection of Western art and artifacts, and a detailed family history that traced the Henderson lineage back to the original Texas settlers. I was inheriting not just wealth, but a piece of American history. Morrison explained that Jim had been very specific about his wishes for the inheritance. He wanted the money to go to someone who would use it wisely, who would honor his memory by continuing his tradition of quiet generosity, and who would appreciate the value of hard work and simple living. The fact that I had seen value in an old saddle that others dismissed suggested I might be exactly the kind of person Jim had in mind. Chapter 12. Life-changing decisions. The inheritance transformed my life in ways I never could have anticipated. Suddenly, I had the financial freedom to pursue dreams that had seemed impossible just weeks before. But with that freedom came the responsibility to honor Jim Henderson's legacy and use the wealth in ways that would make him proud. My first decision was to pay off my mortgage and those of my parents and siblings. Jim's letter had emphasized the importance of family, and I wanted to ensure that the people I loved most would have the security of owning their homes free and clear. The look of disbelief and gratitude on their faces when I explained what had happened was worth more than any amount of money. I also established a scholarship fund at the local high school, focusing on students who wanted to pursue careers in agriculture, ranching, or rural veterinary medicine. Jim had been passionate about supporting young people who chose to stay in rural communities, and I wanted to continue that tradition. The scholarship would ensure that his values lived on in future generations. The old Henderson Ranch, which had been sold decades earlier, came up for sale again just 6 months after I received the inheritance. I bought it back, not to live on, but to preserve as a working ranch that would demonstrate sustainable agriculture practices and serve as an educational center for young ranchers. It seemed like the perfect way to honor Jim's memory. I kept my day job and my modest lifestyle, using the inheritance income to fund charitable projects and investments that would continue to grow the trust for future generations. Jim had taught me through his example that true wealth isn't about what you spend, but about what you can do for others. Chapter 13. The legacy continues. 5 years have passed since I unzipped that hidden compartment and discovered Jim Henderson's will. The saddle, now fully restored to its original beauty, hangs in a place of honor in my home office, a daily reminder of how dramatically life can change when you follow your instincts and see value where others see only junk. The Henderson Foundation, which I established with part of the inheritance, has grown into a significant force for good in rural communities across Texas. We've funded medical clinics, supported family farms, and provided disaster relief when droughts and floods threatened ranching communities. Every project is guided by Jim's philosophy of quiet generosity and practical help. The scholarship program has sent dozens of young people to college, many of whom have returned to their rural communities as teachers, veterinarians, and agricultural specialists. They carry forward Jim's belief that rural America is worth preserving and that education is the key to keeping these communities vibrant and sustainable. I've also become something of an expert on hidden compartments and secret storage, helping other people who suspect they might have found something unusual. While I've never discovered anything as dramatic as Jim's will, I've helped reunite families with lost photographs, found old letters that solved family mysteries, and even located a few valuable items that had been forgotten for decades. The story of the saddle and the will has been featured in newspapers and magazines, inspiring others to look more carefully at items they might otherwise dismiss. Auction houses report increased interest in old leather goods and furniture, as people hope to find their own hidden treasures. While most searches turn up nothing, the possibility keeps the spirit of discovery alive. But perhaps the most important legacy is the lesson Jim Henderson taught through his unconventional will, that true value often lies hidden beneath the surface, waiting for someone with the wisdom to look beyond appearances. That old saddle taught me that the most valuable treasures in life are often the ones that others overlook, and that sometimes the best investments are the ones that everyone else thinks are worthless. Thank you so much for listening to this incredible story of discovery and unexpected inheritance. It just goes to show that you never know what treasures might be hiding in the most ordinary places. I'd love to hear from you. Please leave a comment letting me know what part of the world you're listening from. Have you ever found something unexpected at an auction or estate sale? I'm always fascinated by stories of hidden treasures and surprising discoveries. And if you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps me continue sharing these amazing true stories of ordinary people who stumble upon extraordinary discoveries. Thanks again for being part of this incredible journey.